I do a lot of different types of diving. Recreational diving, technical diving, cave diving, rebreather diving. No matter what type of diving I'm doing, there are 4 pieces of gear that always come with me. And I'm not talking about mask and fins. What's up, everybody? If you haven't been here before, my name is Zach. I am a dive guide and a technical rebreather instructor. And before that, I got my start in teaching as a combat lifesaver instructor in the Army. When I was a combat medic, gear was extremely important. Don't get me wrong, it's critical to be able to improvise when the situation calls for it, but most of the time, it's better to actually have what you need. You can make a tourniquet pretty easily, but if I need a 3¼ inch 14 gauge needle catheter to decompress somebody's chest, it's gonna be hard to DIY that. So I learned to consider my gear extremely critically, because it's easy to create clutter that hinders your performance. So it's important to bring exactly what you need and not more. Diving is no different, so let's talk about the 4 pieces of gear that I bring on every dive, no matter what kind of dive it is. Even if I was gonna be renting gear somewhere, this stuff would still be coming with me. In fact, when I went cave diving in Budapest, I did rent gear. I rented a backplate and wing, back mount doubles, apex regulators, really quality stuff. It was great, but I still brought these pieces of gear. My Shearwater Petrel 2 is the first item on the list. This dive computer comes with me no matter what type of diving I'm doing. My rebreather dive computer has a cable coming off of it, so I can't take it on an open circuit dive with me, but I can take this one. And my open circuit dive computer isn't CCR capable. I don't need it for that because I don't dive trimix or CCR on open circuit, right? Obviously, I'm diving it on my rebreather. So my Petrel 2 is the computer that goes between those 2 platforms. This thing has been my constant dive buddy for going on 10 years now. That's a pretty good investment. I'm not saying that you need to go out and buy this dive computer specifically. There's plenty of good dive computers out there, but at least have one that moves between your different platforms, especially if you switch between, recreational diving and rebreather diving or something like that. It's good to have that familiarity, and it's a must for me. GoPro. There's a running joke in diving that if you want to see something really special on a dive, forget your camera on the boat. This has happened to me so many times. One of the things that we see super rarely out here is whale sharks. I've had the pleasure of seeing 4 different whale sharks underwater, and not a single time did I have a camera. Well, I've learned my lesson, and now I carry a GoPro on every dive. Just the GoPro clipped off in case I need it. But the other day, I was out at an unfamiliar dive site somewhere new, and I got to see a Hawaiian stingray, or a broadray, whatever you want to call it. I've only seen 4 of these things in my entire career, and only 1 other on this island. So that was a really special moment, and I actually got to capture it this time because I carry a GoPro on every dive. I also commonly film my students so we can go over their performance later in class, and that is super useful. Spare double ender. I know I'm preaching to the choir here for technical divers, but some recreational divers may not yet know the wonders of the double ender. Need a place to store your wrist computer until you get your BCD on? Spare double ender. Did your side mount bungee just break and you need to hold your valve up while you get yourself sorted out? Spare double ender. Need to make a little bit of noise to get your teammates' attention? Spare double ender. Did you just drop your double ender? Double ender. These things are infinitely useful. I carry at least 1 on my shoulder D-ring at all times, sometimes more than 1 depending on what kind of dive I'm doing, but I always have at least 1 extra spare double ender on my gear at all times. You never know when you're gonna need it. Line cutter. I use the Easy Cut Trilobite in particular, and I have one of these with me on every single dive that I do. I've attached one to each of my BCDs, so I don't even have to think about it, but even if I were to rent gear, I would bring one to slide onto the webbing, or I'd attach one to the wrist on my computer or something like that. Either way, I'm bringing one. Some divers get excited about these big off dive knives, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're cool knives, but they're not super useful underwater. First of all, you're liable to stab yourself with them. Second of all, a smaller knife is almost always more useful utility-wise. You're not gonna use this thing to defend yourself, and if you're gonna stab anything, you're more likely to stab yourself, and it's hard to stab yourself with a line cutter. And that's why I carry a line cutter. Before I had this rule, I was on a dive one time and I didn't have any kind of cutting device, and a manta ray with fishing line wrapped around its fin with line trailing for a good distance behind it swam by me. And if I had had a line cutter, I would have been able to get most of the line off of it. Now, I reached over and got one from one of my dive buddies and was able to get a good chunk of it off, but I could have done more, and that kills me to this day. So I do not get in the water without some type of line cutter. While you don't want to carry too much crap underwater, there's just no substitute for certain pieces of dive gear. It's important to be prepared for any situation you could realistically encounter. And if you need gear, you better have it. But at the end of the day, diving is about having fun. So make sure you have what you need for that as well. I'd like to take a second to thank my supporters on Patreon. They make videos like this possible. They're some of the coolest people on the planet. If you would like to be part of that elite group, then you can follow the link to Patreon in the pinned comment below. You'll get access to some exclusive content. You will be able to ask me whatever questions you want. You'll get your name at the end of every video and my eternal gratitude. I'd also like to thank you for diving with me today, and I'll see you in the water.